My name is Kylam, and today we'll be taking a glimpse of the American woman post-World War II and the challenges that came with working women. For context, World War II started on September 1st of 1939. While American women stayed in the country, American men left their home country to fight in the war. This meant there was a lack of laborers in factories and shipyards, since the majority of them were previously working men. But the government needed workers in these areas in order to supply the war itself. Thus, they encouraged women to work more physical labor jobs to assemble and supply war equipment. They worked in factories, shipyards, they tested equipment, became mechanics, technicians, and even engineers and riveters. One of the main concerns of America at the time was, what about the kids? If there wasn't a mother or father at home to take care of them, who would take care of them? Thus, the government decided to subsidize childcare facilities and bring up temporary government daycares. Before moving on to what happened after World War II, and when the war ended, I just wanted to preface the intersectionality and the identity of Black women during the time. History and discussion of non-white minorities is still limited in comparison to the discussion of those with white backgrounds. In the resources I have reviewed, some books and articles mention how their discussion strictly revolves around the white woman, and briefly addresses the scholarly limitation revolving around Black women at the time. Only one of my scholarly sources I have chosen for this project mentioned how Black women have always been the homemaker and have always worked. This was because their Black husbands would be discriminated against and were either left with low-paying wages or completely unemployed due to the companies and enterprises favoring white women and white men working in these industries instead. Thus, there has always been Black women working in order to provide for their family and for their children, even post-World War II. It's important to note that other prominent ethnic minorities that were living in America at the time, such as Black Americans, Chinese, Japanese, and Jewish families, all of which fought for the US in World War II, faced a different reality from what I will share to you today about the realities of white women and working white women. So immediately after World War II ended, in September 2nd of 1945, many men returned to their home countries, but women were essentially fired and kicked from the wartime jobs. Many reasons for this worked in tandem with one another, especially if it was benefiting the white male, as well as confirming gender stereotypes if applicable. One of the reasons why women were kicked out from their jobs was because the government wanted secure jobs for the returning soldiers, for the returning men. Removing women from these stereotypically male and masculine positions was an obvious choice for enterprises and the government at the time. The general male consensus was they did not want women to be in the workforce at all. They wanted women to return homes and begin starting new families with the returning soldiers. To, unfortunately, help kick out the women, they also immediately removed the subsidized childcare facilities. This forced working mothers of young children to return home and care for their families. Many women argued and advocated for the continuation of subsidized childcare facilities, many of these arguments being that their husbands were still away on active duty, thus they still needed wages to support their families and children. Early childhood educators argued that development outside the home actually improved learning and improved social skills. Additionally, many argued that the post-war economic boom needed further help of women so that the country could, earn more money. However, the Children's Bureau, who wasn't in control of the subsidized childcare facilities, was not convinced that childcare was something to invest time and money into. Reasons being that they did not see women, especially women of young children, as productive paid laborers of society, because men contributed to the economy more than them, and this was mainly due to the fact that systematically the workforce favored white males. Additionally, childcare itself was seen as purely the mother's duty, and a private duty at that. It was not a public issue to be discussed publicly and dealt with publicly. It was the at-home, the in-private family issue, childcare. On the other hand, the government wanted to support the economy by supporting the public economy, which is run by private enterprises by men. In the end, the government did not want to spend money on public provision or public welfare, but they did want to spend money on growing the public economy run by these private enterprises. On the contrary, there were actually many working women. Their growing economy was quickly becoming a consumer-driven one. The federal government encouraged married couples to purchase a private home, a car, household appliances, and other expensive consumer goods. And to satisfy this new ideal, two incomes were very necessary to purchase all these new items. Thus, both mothers and fathers with children had to work. Another issue that prevented women joining the workforce or continuing their jobs in the workforce was the notion that women shouldn't work physical labor jobs or these masculine male jobs. The Cold War started in 1947, 2 years after World War II ended, and the main reason why this war started was because the political ideological rivalry between the Soviet and American societies. In 1936, when the Constitution of the USSR was written, it states that women in the USSR are accorded equal rights with men in all spheres of economic, state, cultural, social, and political life. This very statement of Soviet ideology contradicts American ideology entirely. American women were expected to live this domestic life and not work at all. They did not have equal rights as men and were seen as lesser citizens. So despite women's wartime effort and the changing ideals and roles of women because of their efforts, the pressures of the Cold War and Soviet ideology essentially halted this progress. In conclusion, despite women's wartime efforts being very vital to ending the war, many women decided to actually just leave the workforce entirely and return back to their domestic lives. Those who decided to work, they were essentially kicked out of their jobs due to societal and governmental pressures. One of the reasons why I chose to discover and research about American women post-World War II was because I have read this book, We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson is a renowned female author who lived through World War II and lived a bit through the Cold War as well. Her novel, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, was written in 1962, which was 17 years after World War II ended, but still amidst the Cold War. In her novel, we can see that her writing is highly influenced from her post-war and Cold War experiences. In the story, the Blackwood sisters, Maricat and Constance, were ostracized from society for being different from the standard household at that time, the standard American household. Upon reflecting on this novel, as well as the post-war experiences that Shirley Jackson definitely lived through, I believe that the mistreatment and harassment of these Blackwood sisters from the community stemmed from the real-life fears of Soviet ideology as well as misogyny in America. If you have read the novel in its entirety, you will know that Constance and America are quite literally murderers who have poisoned their entire family in order to kill them, and that is quite a valid reason to ostracize them and fear them. However, the motives behind this murder were quite ambiguous, though chapters have hinted these reasons were because of the misogyny and abuse they experienced from their family. The Blackwood family had toxic family dynamics. Specifically, Maricat endured child abuse. Constance, on the other hand, had to endure highly enforced gender stereotypes and gender roles of the family. She always cooked and cleaned. She had to care for her sister. She was like a mother, even though she was only a teenager. Worst of all, these sisters could have done nothing about their situation, and thus they felt that they needed to murder their family to escape. However, it is sad that this is quite literally the last option for Maricat and Constance, and a last option that Jackson felt that she should have written about. Another reason why these two sisters were ostracized was that they were, after the murder, lone women living in a rich household. They had wealth from their family. At the time, the notion was that women could not handle money, that they needed a man to protect their money and a man to handle the money. Despite this being misogynistic, this was quite a real reality and quite true in a legal aspect. Many women were not allowed to open bank accounts, and women weren't given the right to open a bank account until 1974. This book was written in 1962. So despite these sisters having money, they did not have economic independence because they did not have access to a bank. This is one of the ways that culture, government policy, and women's issues were all intertwined. Jackson wrote about her opinion about the barred economic independence of women through the character Cousin Charles. Cousin Charles, the cousin to these Blackwood sisters, was written to be a combination of misogyny and greed. Greed of that he wanted to control the sisters' money and use the money for himself, as well as provide misogynistic reasons for taking control of the money, being that women could not control money by themselves. In conclusion, there were many aspects of post-war experiences that Shirley Jackson incorporated into her story, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Them being American versus Soviet ideology, and as well as anti-feminism and misogyny. Coming to the end of this video essay, I just want to conclude with a few closing remarks. The notion of women playing a purely domestic and homemaking role in society is deeply rooted and ingrained in American ideology, and often these values were incorporated into government law. This raised a multitude of barriers to prevent women from leaving this domestic life to join the workforce. The intertwining of American ideology and official law produced an incredible nuanced mess of ultimately the continuation of anti-feminism for these white American women, and thus many of them suffered. These ideas carried throughout the post-World War II era into the Cold War. However, it still remained that when women were given the opportunity to work, they proved to the nation that they could do it, and they could do it well. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm not sure if I'll post it publicly, but if I do, thank you. Regardless, I hope I get a good grade on this project. Bye!